Grad school is a very strange place. It's a weird time in one's life and a long series of milestones on the way to an academic career. In many ways, it is a ridiculous decision to make. You go into self-inflicted poverty. You spend years at it, usually your 20s. All of your 20s. And there are no guarantees. Most people decide to quit because they turn out to hate it. But for those of us who yearn for that academic lifestyle, we almost have to go through this trial by fire. This week and next, we've invited on faculty from our recent Grad School 101 program to help us talk through it all. First up, it's economist Jayme Lemke and philosopher Mark LeBar. So, Professor Lemke, thank you so much for being on the show here. And I want to start out by asking you, what made you want to go to graduate school and what made you actually decide to go to graduate school?
Oh, yeah, two different questions there. I think these kind of questions, everybody has their origin story in mind. Like, we're all a little bit of the superhero in our own mind, and we have these narratives as to why did I decide to become an economist. So, mine is I always loved ideas, always loved reading and writing. So, like, when I was a kid, my parents would punish me by taking away books, which doesn't work for a lot of people. But so I think I was always interested in those kind of pursuits. And then when I was an undergrad, I took an economics class in comparative economic systems. And I'd always been looking for things that were important about life and about the human experience. And I'd been mostly looking for them in the arts and in philosophy and in religion. And I think it had never occurred to me that economics was a source of these as well. So then when I took this comparative economic systems class, and it was really focused on the difference between capitalist and communistic systems, just learning about how much this could matter for the quality of life and the quality of experience people were able to have on this planet, and how important the economic system itself and the functioning of the economy was to that. I knew I wanted to work with those ideas. So I knew I wanted to do something in ideas. I actually didn't know right off the bat that I wanted to go into the academy. So the way I framed it when I first went into faculty and asked for their advice, career advice, was what can I do where I get to talk and think about these kind of ideas? So I think I went into grad school very much not knowing if it was going to work out for me. Because I had a different background. I was a music major when I took that first economics class. So for me, I think becoming confident that it was going to work out for me was very much a trial and error process. But yeah, it really was that commitment that economics was something that really mattered for the world that was my motivation.
Did your interest in the arts stick with you at all?
Yeah. I'm actually learning to play the ukulele right now. I still play the piano, so I think having those kind of pursuits I found has actually been useful for me, not just as a person, but also if you are going to be writing, talking, speaking, you're essentially working as a creative person. Even if you're in a discipline that most people don't think of that way, like economics, you are a creator. So kind of feeding that part of yourself I found personally valuable.
That sort of brings me to my next theme, which is what is life like as a graduate student?
Yeah. That's a tough question to answer. And I think everybody you ask would give you a different description. But one of the reasons it's tough is that you really kind of have enough space to create your own structure when you're in graduate school. So most graduate programs leave you on a pretty long leash. So this can be fantastic and this can be terrible because it means you can wander off and think that you're doing your own thing, but really you just don't know what's going on. So I think it's very important for graduate students to be conscious about the structure of their days and weeks and the kind of experience that they're creating for themselves. Because really it's a pretty minimal number of hours that you actually have to be a particular place at a particular time in most programs, maybe less than 10 a week. So you have all this extra space that you really need to be disciplined about experimenting and figuring out a kind of routine that can work for you, early on in terms of studying and preparing well for your courses. Later on, of course, in terms of doing your own research, which I think is a problem that, carries through the rest of your life. That's going to be a problem you're going to face as a career academic as well. So learning how to navigate that as early as possible, I think, is very important.
Yeah, it sort of always seemed to me that if you are in a College of Arts and Sciences or something like it, if you're in the humanities, you have to take seriously the arts side of arts and sciences, right? That you're a craftsman of sorts, and you're honing your skills, you're making a very personalized product, and yes, there's an art to that, but you definitely have to be disciplined in your, practice of those skills and your building of those skills.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And no matter what scientific paradigm you're working in, the writing itself, the research design, these are very much arts rather than something that there are specific and easy formula to follow. So you have to practice. You have to practice a lot. So that means setting yourself up to be able to do that while you're a student. And that includes doing things like doing the suggested reading on the syllabus and not just the required reading. Actually investing early into building your foundation, because it's that foundation that you need to be able to build and create on later in graduate school and in your academic life. So kind of not shying away from really investing in the fundamentals of this subject, even if so for example, in economics, your first year classes are largely theoretical. Even if you're not going to be a theoretician per se, investing in that skill set then is going to give you the foundation that you can kind of practice and construct from later on. And also just in terms of the personal daily work of it, building that routine of being someone who has that mental stamina to be consistently doing this every day.
Now that brings me straight to the subject of your lecture for this program, Grad School 101, and you have the first lecture, which is always a challenge, and the title is Plan Ahead, Work Hard, Make Good Decisions. And I realize we've already started to discuss some of those ideas, but can you give us sort of a preview or a brief version of the kinds of advice that you're going to offer students about planning ahead, working hard, making good decisions?
Yeah. I don't know. First, I think it's important to just caveat the idea of advice itself, because advice is kind of like offering a single solution to people, and I don't really believe in one-size-fits-all solutions. So I think, this is going to be advice, things I've learned from my perspective, from my experiences, but I do think that maybe one of the, this is, you get caught quickly in a kind of a trap here, even trying to talk about it. But so I think the first piece of advice I would give is not to blindly take any one person's advice. And so that means kind of seeking out multiple mentors and being aware enough of what you want to accomplish and whether your daily activity is leading in that direction, that you can experiment with different ideas and adjust. And also kind of consider, so look at the people that you are taking advice from. And advice doesn't always have to mean words. Advice can mean, and maybe this is even a more significant form of advice, observing someone's actions in the professional space. And so kind of consider, is that person doing the kind of thing that you truly want to be doing? So, who are you taking that advice from? What is their knowledge base? Who are you observing? So anyway, that's the caveat. I have, several things that I want to talk about tonight, so I thought maybe I would mention just 3 today briefly.
Yeah, sure.
So first, and this will be useful for whether you've already started your graduate program or haven't chosen one yet, but I think one of the most important things to do is to read the faculty's CVs and their research. So recent research, obviously if you could read the whole CV, that might be ideal in some sense, but I think that's not realistic. So you can start by reading their recent research, read anything on that CV that's particularly relevant to your interests, and that's for a few reasons. One, every PhD program by definition is going to be a research-oriented department. So what the faculty are going to be teaching you to do is to research at the end of the day. And they're going to be teaching you to research in the way that they know how. So when you're selecting a program, it's what you're going to be trained to do in that program. You have a very easy way to see ahead of time, which is that you can read that final product by reading the faculty's CVs. So I think that's the most critical and the most important reason, rather than listening to anybody tell you about program rankings or their personal experiences. You can go directly to the record. You can read that research and see what that means to you and if it's the kind of work you want to be doing.
Yeah, I love that point. That's so important to get that kind of inside sight on the person you're going to be working so closely with for so long. It better be a good fit.
Yeah.
It better be somebody whose work and perspective you think is valuable.
Yeah, absolutely. And it'll help you make a good decision as to what program to go into. And it'll also help you avoid embarrassing yourself. You don't want to go in on day one and say, is there anybody here who does Soviet political economy? And, you're asking the expert in the field. Mm-hmm. So you can avoid those kind of things as well. But yeah, the more important issue is just making sure you're in the right place for really what you want to do. And then the second thing I would say is, and this relates to the idea of imposter syndrome, so I've been fortunate enough to be able to work with a pretty large number of graduate students, given how recently I was in graduate school myself, by virtue of the fact that one of the things I've been doing, in addition to being teaching and doing scholarship with the Hayek program here at GMU, I've also been directing this PhD fellowship program. And so both in my personal experience, thinking back to myself in grad school and my peers and the students I've worked with since, I think this conversation about imposter syndrome and the idea that we tend to get a little bit too focused on how smart we are relative to everybody else in the room and start to question whether we really belong there. I think that's a serious concern. And so my advice would be to really try to embrace being perfect and be okay with it. So the first thing I want to say is, congratulations, you are smart. You got into a graduate program, you're smart, that's done, you don't have to worry about that anymore. So now, if you're walking into seminar rooms and your primary concern is proving to other people that you're smart, you can wind up doing a lot of things that are really kind of pathological and not that productive for learning. And if you're training yourself to just perfectly imitate other people in order to, convince them that you're as intelligent as you think they are, then you're actually not contributing anything scientifically because you're just duplicating someone else. So this is one of the more difficult pieces of advice I think to adopt, but I think it is really important to learn to be comfortable with the fact that nobody's perfect. You get comfortable being imperfect yourself, because you have to put yourself on the line a lot. As an academic, you're basically a communicator, whether that's speaking, teaching in the classroom, writing. You're always putting yourself out there, and what you put out there is never going to be perfect, because nothing in the world is, and that's okay. So just kind of really try to embrace that and enjoy that part. Be fearless about it.
Yeah, I like to say that I think if you come out of graduate school, again, especially in the humanities, if you come out of graduate school without having learned the ultimate Socratic lesson that you actually know very little,
right,
then you've kind of wasted a lot of time, because you should be writing a dissertation that makes you into an expert on this tiny subject. And by the end of it, almost everybody realizes how much more to the story there is than they've been able to uncover. And they realize that, it'll take decades more to be a real expert on all this stuff. And, you should come out of grad school with a huge, weighty sense of humility.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's, the more you learn, the more you realize that you don't understand. And so I think if you let that get to you, it can actually kind of kill your career. Because one of the things that you need to do is you need to send out research and you need to send out written products. And if you're waiting for them to be perfect and waiting for you to have filled every single possible gap and connection in your own knowledge, even when you're already someone who knows more about this topic or subject than somebody else, you'll just never send it out. There's always something more you could do. There's always something more you could learn. So yeah, kind of, recognizing that humility is actually part of the scientific process and not something that should hold you back, but instead can push you forward, I think is one of the deep lessons that people learn, either, if they wind up being successful, they learn that either explicitly or implicitly. And then there's one more if we still have time. Okay, so the last thing that I would suggest, and I might have referred to this already, but just have an idea in your own mind about what your own purpose is, and be aware, again, that those faculty in your department are research faculty. And so there might be other career considerations that you want to keep in mind for yourself that go beyond that. Maybe you're really passionate about teaching. So you might need to be seeking out additional resources or additional mentors to help, guide you down the path of becoming a truly excellent teacher, if that's not something that is emphasized in your current program. And then the other reason I think it's important to maintain that sense of what your own purpose is and why you cared about this subject and why you got here in the first place is that academia is this big, it's this creature unto itself. So, and once you get in it, you feel all these different kinds of pressures that come from your academic peers. Which of those are you going to respond to, and which can you safely ignore? You won't know unless you have a clear sense of kind of what your own purpose is. So I don't know if these things are as concrete and as practical as you were hoping, but I think reading the faculty, embracing your imperfection, and knowing what your purpose is. These are really important. And actually, there's one other thing that I would add that I think is critical, which is recognizing that once you enter grad school, nobody else is responsible for you anymore. So, you really have to be your own boss and your own taskmaster. And so kind of recognizing that you're now entering a professional environment, even though it still looks like a school, I think is an important thing to be aware of, because your faculty are going to be looking to you to interact with them in a professional way. And so that can manifest and matter in small ways, are you professional in being quickly responsive to email? And if somebody is giving you advice on a research project, do you take careful notes while they're speaking? Little things like that, the discipline of your daily work and the way you interact with your colleagues, these actually matter quite a lot in terms of becoming embedded within an academic community as well, in my view.
What surprised you the most about graduate school?
I think what surprised me the most actually relates to that last point, in the sense of how much being the person who's willing to take the extra step matters. So are you going to be the person who does read that extra article, who stays afterwards to help put away the chairs after the seminar, who is waiting outside your professor's office because you just have to talk to them about this idea? Another reason why I like being in academia is I'm the kind of person who enjoys being in the basement of the library around all the dusty books. Are you going to to stay there just a little bit longer than some of your peers? And these don't have to be big things, and I'm not saying you have to be working 80 hours a week to be successful, because I don't believe that that's the case. But being the person who's willing to put in that effort and show up and be responsive. If a faculty member suggests to you that you should read a particular book for a project you're working on, do not go back and have another conversation with that faculty member until you've read that book. I've seen it happen more times than you might think. So I think, just kind of those basic elements of professionalism, I've seen them matter really a lot then to those students' peers and to their faculty, and it can really differentiate you.
Values found at the margins, right?
Yes, yeah, exactly.
Well, I love it. Thank you so much, Professor Lemke. We really enjoyed having you on the show. I appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you for chatting.
Okay, so Professor LeBar, what made you decide to go to graduate school?
I'd made that decision twice. The first time was as I was finishing my undergraduate career. And I think in much the same way that lots of students in high school decide that going to college is like 13th grade and it's what comes next, I decided, oh, well, I don't really have a better plan, so I'll go to graduate school. So I did that for about a year, and for a variety of reasons, decided to take a temporary break. And that temporary break turned into 13 years in the personal computer industry. But during that time, in a variety of ways, I became aware that I just could not let go of my interest in philosophy and my sense that other things that I was doing just were not meaningful in the way that I wanted them to be. So I knew about the crappy job prospects in philosophy. I knew that it was going to be difficult to get back in after that period of time. But I was really motivated by my interest in philosophy. And so I thought, well, I have to give this a shot. And then fortunately it worked out. But I just sort of couldn't imagine spending the rest of my life without doing more work in philosophy. That was really it.
So you were a, quote, non-traditional student, correct?
I was significantly older than almost everybody else that was in my other peers in the graduate program.
Now, grad school is sort of a strange place to be and a strange time in life anyhow. So tell me a bit about what it's like as a non-traditional grad student.
I don't think it actually differed all that much for me than we had a child when I went, and that was certainly an economic and lifestyle complicator that many grad students have, but many do. Even younger grad students come in and are married and have children, and there's just a sort of life study balance that has to be struck while trying to figure out how to pay the bills. So that wasn't different. I think I anticipated that it was going to be really unpleasant, and this is partly because I'd done some coursework in grad programs where the morale wasn't all that great amongst grad students and where they were sort of fiercely competitive and dog eat dog. But in particular, when I got to University of Arizona, where I did my PhD, that wasn't it at all. It was Disneyland. And in the sense that I was amongst a bunch of people that were interested in doing philosophy, and the faculty really saw grad students as co-investigators, and grad students treated each other that way, and were very collaborative. So my experience really brought out to me, number one, how different the different environments in different grad programs, even in the same discipline, are, which you might not know if you're only in one grad program. So as a result of that, I really think that climate matters a lot, which is one reason that I really advocate that students make a physical, bodily, personal appearance to check out their prospective programs before they commit a significant chunk of their lives to those places, because they really vary. And places that I was comfortable, other people might not have been. I certainly wouldn't have been as comfortable elsewhere, but I was really surprised at actually how wonderful my graduate experience was.
Now, your lecture subject for this Graduate School 101 seminar that we're conducting is, quote, before you apply. So here's the scenario I'm going to give you. It's about 4 months away from most graduate school application deadlines. I'm a great student, great undergraduate student, but I really haven't done much of anything to scout out my grad school opportunities. I sort of feel maybe like you did, though, that this is sort of the next thing to do. And when you were applying to college. I've finished college now. I don't quite know what to do. Well, go ahead to graduate school. But it's 4 months out, and I really haven't done much. So what do I do? How do I scramble most effectively to actually get this done and get into a graduate program that I would like and flourish in?
Right. So going back 4 to 6 months, I take it is not really an option because time really is of the essence, and it's of the essence in two ways. One is that I think there's a significant amount of research that can or should go into your surveying the field of prospective graduate programs. There's lots of them, and there are various resources for finding out about them in the different disciplines. But I think you really do want to do some research unless you're independently wealthy and you have nothing but time on your hands to investigate programs and then gin up applications for them. Your time and money are probably limited, so you're going to have to be selective, and that means you need a pool of candidate institutions or departments to be selective amongst, and that requires some research. So you're going to have to start, I think, hitting the internet and whatever other resources you can to get a survey of programs to think about where to apply. At the same time, and the other real problem here is that if you're wanting to get into a decent program, you're going to be competing against really good students coming from other environments and backgrounds and programs. And some of them will have been preparing for longer. So you have some catching up to do, and some of that is not really your time scale. So for example, in many philosophy programs, not all, but many, you need a GRE score. Well, okay, so you're kind of back up against it, and just in terms of scheduling a GRE, let alone doing any preparation for it, but that needs to get done. Letters of reference, letters of recommendation from faculty really matter. And a good letter of recommendation is not something that you want to go to a faculty member, no matter how much they liked you as a student, and say, by the way, would you write a letter for me for graduate school? And they say, sure, you're a great student. And you say, great, I need it Monday. That's not going to endear you to the people that really need to be thinking as fondly about you as they can. So one of the very first things is get their clocks going. Tell them that you want to apply. This is your time frame. If you have materials from the work that you did with them, supply them with that, so they have whatever materials at hand that they can want to make use of in writing their letters. The other part, and this is really a philosophy specific thing, I don't know how other disciplines do it. In philosophy, grades matter. That's a matter of getting transcripts going. That's not a big time issue, but you need a writing sample, and good writing for most people takes time. And if you already have something in mind, maybe you're in a position where you can do some editing and get it going. If you don't have a good writing sample, your back is really up against it, trying to produce a sample that, again, is not just okay writing, but that's going to give you a competitive advantage, or at least not a competitive disadvantage, in competing against other strong students to get into good programs. So I think if you're really back up against it that way, one thing that you can, you sort of have to start all those tracks simultaneously, but one thing to do is to maybe ratchet down your expectations a little bit. Given that you don't have the prep work going into the process that others might, you might want to ratchet down your expectations and think in terms of a good intermediary step, such as a terminal master's program rather than a PhD program. But that's a step for a lot of people that I think makes good sense anyway, so I don't see that as necessarily a big problem.
Or perhaps if you've kind of run out of a comfortable amount of time, plan to wait a year and really build out what you're doing so you're better positioned the next time around. What do you think about that strategy?
Yeah, that's a great strategy. I think, so there's something for and against it. I mean, if you have a job, if you're doing something that's productive that you can do for another year, that's especially attractive. I think the thing that you have to watch is that your skills will atrophy. So, and they atrophy very quickly, and especially writing skills. So if you're in the position of needing to generate a writing sample, that's something that you need to factor into how you use that year. You probably need to put yourself in a position where you're writing drafts, or maybe sitting in on a course or something like that, where you have the occasion to keep your writing skills at a sharp edge while you try to develop something that's good. So it's not a problem once you get accepted that there may have been some time lapse, but you really want to be putting your best foot forward. And I think you want to be working on that aggressively while you're taking advantage of the extra year to get yourself in optimum position for application.
Yeah, I think the same thing goes with letters of recommendation, because the more time goes by, the more sort of distant you are from the faculty members who are likely to be writing those, and they won't be quite as personalized. But then what do you think is the right time frame to work with? Like how early is too early, right? When is the sweet spot to get started on your graduate school application materials?
Let me give two answers to that. So the basic sort of sweet spot I would think in philosophy would be about a year. And that allows you time to do research. It allows you time to talk to your faculty while you're still in your program and say, hey, I'm planning on applying, let me know what I can get you, but I'll be coming back to you this fall. Faculty that know you while you're in the program are not going to have a problem with that at all and will appreciate the time. But if you think that grad school might be something that you want to do eventually, I think thinking about a writing sample long in advance is a great idea. When you are writing papers, sort of having the idea in mind, not that every paper has to be a candidate as a writing sample, but if you're in a course or a seminar or something where you write a paper that you really like, that's a great opportunity to have a conversation with the professor and say, I'm thinking of applying to grad school. Could something like this be turned into a good writing sample? And faculty love helping students with things like that. So you want to take advantage of the process, I would say, as long in advance as you can with that item. The GRE and some of the other, transcripts you can't really do anything with till you are finished, but with the writing sample, the earlier you get started on that, the better, especially for people like me. For me, writing is a slow process. I need to go through lots of editions, and that just means the more time I can bake into the process, the better the odds that I'm going to have something that I'm happy with at the other end.
Is there one piece of sort of mega advice that you really, really, really wish you'd gotten when you were applying to grad school that you now make sure to say to students?
Yeah, I didn't get this advice, but it would be really high on my list, and that is find a way to get to the programs that you're thinking about attending. That might not be the case. It probably doesn't make a lot of sense at the application process because you don't know if you're going to be accepted. But if you're accepted, I would say move heaven and earth to get out to the department, hopefully during a weekday when you can talk to graduate students that are already in the program. You can talk to faculty. You can get a sense for the atmosphere. I think that, again, given that if you're looking at a PhD, you're probably planning on spending 5 or 7 years in this place. And some students, unfortunately, have the experience where they walk in and from day one, they know it's not the right place for them. That's a mistake that should have been corrected in the process of deciding what to do. So I think I put a really high premium on doing campus visits if it's humanly possible to do so.
What surprised you the most about graduate school?
I think it was how good a time I had. And I didn't really appreciate that. And again, I was really fortunate in the program I was in. I was very fortunate with the cohort of students I was in. I was very fortunate with faculty. And it wasn't till I got out and had to start working as a professor. You get all this freedom as a professor and you're doing your own courses and you're not subject to supervision. But I realized I'd left behind this intensive incubation environment for philosophical thought. And not until really it was gone did I realize how much I absolutely enjoyed and benefited and was stimulated and inspired by it. So I would wish that for anybody in a graduate program. I know a lot of people don't have that experience, and I wasn't really expecting it. And it surprised me when I had it, but it was one of the best surprises that I think that I've ever had.
Professor Mark LeBar, thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you, Anthony.
Join us here again next week for more about grad school from our team of experts. Our greatest thanks go out to Professors Lemke and LeBar. And next week, political scientists and historians, you're on watch because we pick up with Professors Brandon Davis and Theo Christoph.